And thanks
Thank you.
everybody for joining. I'm looking at almost all of you. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hey, Bruce. It's nice to see you as well. To give everyone a little background, I don't know if Bruce probably does remember this, but I was an actor for years before I became a filmmaker, and Bruce directed me in my very first television commercial. And then he directed me in the first film that I wrote, which was not only a critical failure, but also a commercial failure. And I've made documentaries ever since then, and he went back to commercials for a while. But it's a real pleasure to be here tonight and to be able to talk with Bruce. Bruce, do you want to do a reading first, and then we'll start getting into some questions?
If that seems like the quickest way, I think probably everybody here has has heard me drone on before, so it might be beneficial that I can show you that I can at least have made an attempt at trying to learn to write. So Josh and I talked a little bit about this. I think the easiest thing to do is to start by reading a little piece of the first chapter, which is a description of the very first commercial I was hired to do. It's 1977, it's New York City. I've been here for about a year. I've hoodwinked a guy into hiring me as a director. He's hoodwinked me into being a director who sells himself. So I'm out desperately trying to network and do things, and I meet a guy who is the time buyer for Crazy Eddie. And Crazy Eddie, many of you will know, was a very big electronics retailer in New York, New Jersey, in the Northeast in the late 70s. He sold tons of things, and he made tons of terrible television commercials, most of which were a guy screaming at the camera. So my thought was that I could go and convince him to do something better. So as I say, I'm 23 years old, and I'm desperate to see if I can get somebody to hire me. And this doesn't go quite as I expected. One day in late February, I take the subway out to Avenue U in Sheepshead Bay. It's a section of Brooklyn that's half Italian and half Middle Eastern, half residential, half business. The Crazy Eddie empire is headquartered in a nondescript cinder block building that looks like one of those garages near Shea Stadium where Dominican guys pound dents out of your Buick. The place is totally unmarked, telling. When I finally find it, I buzz a jury-rigged doorbell, it buzzes back, and I go in. I'm in one large room filled with 75 beat-up battleship gray government-issued desks. All of them are covered with leaning towers of papers and takeout glatt kosher food. Every stoop-shouldered clerk in the place looks nauseated because of the sickly green tint cast by the fluorescent lights overhead. The workforce is mostly men. All of them are dressed in various Orthodox attire. Some with tzitzit, some in black suits with white shirts and fedoras, some with payas, the random davening guy over by a cinder block wall swaying back and forth. A goy like me walking in has probably set off an alarm. Chubby little guy in an unbuttoned vest comes over and says, "Can I help?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm here to see Larry Miller." And he said, "Is he expecting you?" And I said, "Yeah, I have a 1:30 appointment." So the little guy beckons me to follow, and he leads me through this mess of desks over to Miller's office and parks me at the door. Miller's inside, sitting at his own shitty desk, also covered in crap. He's in his mid-30s, he's kind of disheveled with a put-upon, pretty defensive posture, which makes sense. If you have his job, ad manager for Crazy Eddie, when you go to a cocktail party and tell people what you do, they'll think you're a total asshole. It's immediately clear that he has no interest in me or this meeting. What do you want to talk about? For some reason, I have total confidence that he's interested in the opinion of a 23-year-old long-haired kid. So I hold forth, done this a million times. Your ads could be a lot better, I say. Who the fuck cares? They work. Yeah, but people think they're kind of obnoxious. I probably could have been subtler. So what? We sell a ton of shit. Okay, but don't you think it might be possible to be effective and less annoying? Like I said, who cares? I actually have an idea about how to do this. But in the real world, like on Earth, commercial directors don't stroll into your office and pitch you ideas. Ad agencies come up with the ideas. And agencies spend time developing the ideas, not thinking them up on the subway ride out to Sheepshead Bay. But I don't know enough to know how many rules I'm breaking, so I plow ahead. The idea is simple, and like most advertising, not at all original. Take scenes from famous movies with famous songs. Follow the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz as time goes by in Casablanca. Recreate the scenes, but instead of having them sing the famous song, have them sing the Crazy Eddie jingle, rearranged in the film's musical style. Funny? Maybe. Less obnoxious? Definitely. More effective? We'll see. The ad guy reflects for less than 5 seconds. Stupid. It'll never work. Compared to what they're doing, it's genius, but I'm not going to correct him. He tells me he'll pass it along to Eddie and we'll be in touch. I know what that means. Fuck off. I leave through a parting sea of observant bookkeeping embezzlers and hop the Q train back to Manhattan. 2 weeks later, the ad guy calls me. Can you come over tomorrow and present these ideas to Eddie? Shit, I'll come right now if that works better for you. And I said, yeah, sure. When? And he goes, 2 o'clock. And I said, out at headquarters. He said, no, Roosevelt Hospital. I said, what? He said, it's a long story. Let's meet in the lobby, 2 o'clock. Roosevelt Hospital in 1977 is in Hell's Kitchen, and Hell's Kitchen is a tough fucking neighborhood. This is not the kind of healthcare facility you're going into by choice or if you have any kind of insurance. I'm pretty confused as I get out of the cab and I walk through a crowd of guys smoking, dressed in hospital gowns, pushing IVs around on rolling poles on my way to the lobby. What are we doing here? Miller's standing at the revolving doors. Eddie's upstairs. What happened? He got stabbed. He did? Yeah, like 16 times, and there's a lot of broken bones. What? Yeah, he was installing a sound system at a disco and he got ambushed when he left. I say, maybe this isn't like a great time to do this presentation. He goes, it's a great time. Eddie wants to stay busy and thought this would be entertaining. Great, I'm now the fucking clown who does balloon tricks for terminally ill kids. We head through a portion of the ground floor where the emergency cases are clustered. People slumped in chairs, lying on gurneys. There's a lot of screaming. Most of it's in Spanish, and I can only assume these people are saying something about being in indescribable pain. The blood-soaked clothes and sheets would kind of speak to that. We get in an elevator. Miller punches the button for the 6th floor. We get up there and it's slightly calmer. So we go down a hallway and into a private room. Jesus. Eddie's in the bed. At least Miller says it's Eddie. What I see is a hairy as a bear guy attached to 2 IVs, his torso wrapped in gauze, wound seepage stains everywhere, one arm in traction, the top of his skull wrapped in more gauze, one leg in traction, inflatable cuffs on his ankles, 2 black eyes, and an oxygen line in his left nostril. The guy is totally fucked up. It doesn't seem appropriate to try and shake hands. In fact, I'm scared to get too close to him for fear I'll catch something, like a stab wound. Miller makes a quick introduction, then tells me to start. Make it quick. He hasn't got all day. He doesn't? Whatever. I try to figure out which of Eddie's blackened eyes to aim my gaze at and dive in. I explain the movies, the scenes, the jingle. I state confidently with no backup that the ads can be a little less intrusive, my euphemism for stone cold obnoxious, and still sell tons of stereos and televisions. I finish the spiel and Eddie grunts, like 3 grunts. His mouth is all fucked up from the beating, so it's impossible to understand him. I'm pretty sure his jaw is broken too, but Miller understands him. He turns to me with the translation. How much to make one? Not all, just one of them. I am not prepared for this question. I figured if everything went great, I'd hear back in a few days and then we'd talk money. So I fumble and throw out a stupidly low number. A number so low, even if you didn't make television commercials, you'd pay me to make one just to show your friends. Eddie grunts again. Miller seems to understand him. Got it. When? Grunt, grunt, slight arm gesture, which stops abruptly when Eddie screams in pain. But he's apparently just given us the go-ahead to make a spot. 2 weeks later, I make a takeoff of Casablanca. That ridiculously low estimate I threw out on the fly has left me with so little money I can only afford to build half an arch on the set, not anything of Rick's Cafe American. I spend most of the budget on a bad Bogart impersonator. He makes more on the job than me. Having never directed a commercial, I desperately try all sorts of things to make myself look experienced. I wear a suit and tie to the set, certain it'll make people overlook the fact that I'm 23. Probably makes them notice it more. The ad goes on the air. The Village Voice writes an article about it. There's a picture of Pam and the Bogart impersonator draped over the piano. The writer says Crazy Eddie has done something interesting with its advertising, which is like saying the guy who always shows up for church drunk managed to grab a shower before this week's services. Whatever. I'm now a New York commercial director. So there's chapter 1.
I think that's a great intro, Bruce. This is my, I was talking with Bruce a couple of days ago. We were talking about this conversation, and this was the second time that I've read the book. And I've been, I think the thing that struck me from the very beginning is I've always found Bruce to be very honest, very direct, very transparent, very clear, funny, sarcastic. But I was also very touched at how thoughtful and insightful this book is about Bruce's own coming of age as an individual, as a person, as a director, etc. I think where I wanted to start, Bruce, with you was, I think one of the interesting things is you went to film school at Boston. You were making documentaries. There's a wonderful moment in the book where you talk about almost graduating and calling Frederick Weissman, the great documentarian, getting him on the phone, surprised that he picks up, and getting his advice. And somehow, in the start of all that, you thought, well, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to make commercials about X-Lax and Delta for the next 30 or 40 years. How the fuck did this happen? Like, what were you thinking?
I think it was all driven by trying to be pragmatic and trying to create stability in a world that looked to me like if you were doing something creative, that was the most difficult thing to insert in your life. It didn't hurt that in my conversation with Frederick Weissman, which I was not prepared for him to pick up the phone, when he did, and I said, basically, how do I grow up to be you? He said, have you ever made a film before? And I said, yeah, I made a documentary at the TV station I worked for. He said, and they paid for it? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's never going to happen again. I said, what are you talking about? He said, that'll never happen. You're going to now have to go convince people for the rest of your life to give you money in order to make films. And I said, but you're like this famous guy and people are just, he goes, I spend 90% of my time looking for money, 10% making a film. Now, this is long before he's won a MacArthur and he's become a god. But I got off the phone and I definitely was rethinking my thoughts of my career path. And when I came to New York, I got a job. If you read the book, you find out my roommate had a master's degree in film. And he got a job on a commercial. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this guy got a job before me. And he calls me from work the first day and he says, do you know how to drive a clutch? And I said, yeah, I'm a guy. And he said, I don't know how to drive a stick shift. Can you come down here and drive this truck for me? The truck was picking up props on a commercial. I watched a commercial being shot. Unbelievable, 70 people building a set, actors, cameramen. Gordon Willis was photographing it. Mel Bourne had built the set. I thought, okay, maybe this is something I should explore. So I did give up pretty quickly on documentaries. I never got around to making another one for another 35 years, but I think I just wanted stability. And I didn't realize how kind of pathological that was in my makeup.
We'll get to that. I'm curious, like So you're still making commercials, and you've been doing this for 40 years. What on earth made you to say, you know what, now I'm going to make a book. I'm going to write a book. That's a good idea.
Yeah, dumb, right? I was not working as much. I had boring stories that I could usually tell people, and because I would usually tell them after, if people asked what I did, they'd always go, "Oh, that must be really fun. That must be a really fun job." And go, sometimes, and then you'd have to demonstrate for them why it was less fun. So I started writing them down, and my wife, Victoria Riddell, the really accomplished writer in this unit, read it, and she, in a very gentle way, she said, "This really sucks, but the stuff that's good in it are all these weird stories." And I said, "But nobody's interested in these stories. They're like little blackouts." So then I thought, well, why not? So I sat down and wrote those, and it turned into a version of the book, and then I did more. And then the last thing I did was include, very much under duress, stuff about my personal life, which I didn't want to write about. And then some people who I listened to pretty closely said, you can't write a memoir without getting people inside your life a little bit. And it was hard, but I'm glad I did.
There's this very, Anthony Bourdain, Kitchen Confidential quality to this book. I remember one of the things that I responded to when I read Bourdain's first book was the whole kind of, this is the way that chefs actually feel about Sunday brunch. And I feel like this book is a lot of moments like that. Did you never want to work in the industry again when you decided to write this book? Were you scared to write it?
Well, there were times when I thought that what I was doing was, putting every nail in my coffin. But it's not really that. I mean, I'm glad that you bring up Kitchen Confidential. That was my model, because I felt in the same way that Tony Bourdain wrote something, and people before it was out said, "Who gives a shit about chefs?" I've done more stuff on this where people go, "You know what? Until I read this book, I had no idea that there was a person who directed the commercial," which is kind of a backhanded compliment for how shitty they think that they think there's nobody, no meathead has to do this. Look at them; they're so bad. But I didn't. I decided once I got into it to be honest about it. And I found that being honest about it made it entertaining, and made it something that people wanted to make their way through. I'm sure I'm going to step on a few toes. I'm sure there's people who aren't going to be returning my phone calls, but there were not that many people returning my phone calls at this point anyway.
Are there, have people on the agency side and the creative side read the book? Have you gotten feedback yet from somebody?
I have. I had one very moving one from me that I got about an hour before we got on, for a man who I had done quite a bit of work with. And he said he had cried as he was reading it, because he was saying, I had no idea about all of this personal stuff that was going on and how that works in. And he said, it's not a book about being a commercial director. It's a book about somebody growing up and trying to live a life and be a husband and a father, and have this weird gig that you're doing. One agency guy said, there's a lot of this book where you come off as a jerk. And I said, well, thank you.
I think you also talk about that in the book a lot. There's something you said to me. I was trying to track down where this was from, and you said this to me probably 15 years ago when we were making our film Backseat together. And you said one day to me, cynicism is the romantic's condom. And I can't remember where that even came from. But one of the things that I took away about at the time, and I've always felt this way about your commercials, it's one of the reasons why I wanted you to direct me in my first film, is that, and I think this is something that you became known for in your commercial work as well, is that there was always, behind the humor and behind the good filmmaking, and I think there was a lot of beautiful artistry in what you do, both commercially and in feature films, there was always a lot of emotional authenticity. And I think one of the things that I found particularly moving about this book was how thoughtful and introspective it was. What was it like for you to reveal yourself in that way? I don't think that's a common thing, that it's not like on a film set or a commercial set that a director can often kind of reveal that stuff. I'd see it in your work, but I didn't know that side of you in quite that way.
It's, I think anybody would say it's hard to put yourself out there and be honest. I think it was easier because I was older. I definitely didn't feel I had anything to prove anymore. And it's not that I was being reflective, but I thought I might as well, if I was going to do this, be accurate. And I think maybe also, you know, I did do a lot of work. I'm still doing the kind of work where oftentimes the goal is to get a viewer to choke up in 60 seconds. And it's really hard, you know, it's a trick. But I enjoy it. I'm not as good at it as some of the other really talented people who do it, but that's what I try to do. And I think what I learned was also putting that kind of stuff out on the page was going to make it a more interesting book, as opposed to just being, you know, telling snide little jokes and here's a story and this happened and oh man, can you believe what a jerk I am? That gets old.
Would you, I think it'd be great to illustrate for our audience a little bit of this side of the book and of you. Do you mind reading that section we talked about? There's another little section in the book.
No, I will read that. And there's a person, one of the essential crew people who I spent years working with, who I'm seeing here on the screen, and she's referenced in this. She'll understand it's her because it's such nasty mouth. So this is 35 years later, and I've had a hugely fortunate career, and everything's supposedly going great. The name of this chapter is Get Help. I'm seeing a therapist twice a week. She is my third. The first guy would show up late for our 8 a.m. appointments. It gave me a complex. The second one called me after 2 visits to tell me she couldn't see me anymore because one of her other patients had feelings for me. That gave me a different kind of complex. It all worked out for the best. This third one is giving me some much needed help. Out in the real world, where there are no cameras, crews, or craft service tables, directors often struggle. As a general rule, we are not good at maintaining healthy personal relationships. Much of that has to do with not remembering that the back and forth in the real world is managed way differently than the back and forth on a set. Healthy relationships need give and take. You need to listen as well as talk. You just have to. One side doesn't get to give all the orders. Directors forget this, especially when they get home. They know what needs to be done, how to do it, and then it needs to be done immediately. Your wife and children often don't agree. Weird. My life at this moment is a grab bag of unsettling, crazy-making experiences. My wife has said our marriage is over, but I don't believe her. I just left the big company in the midst of big success to open a little company with a new partner. Business is going great. We're busy and we're working all the time. But my new partner checked into the hospital with some kind of crippling anxiety disorder after we'd shot 2 jobs. I'm mumbling to myself a lot about how people are just not fucking reliable. My sure things are all in question. My bets on stability are looking shaky. I'm alternately confused, bombastic, or terrified a shit tsunami is about to destroy whatever I have left in one wet, fell, and final swoop. I'm also starting to think I'm losing my mind and that my job might have something to do with that. I explained to the therapist what directing entails. She says, that sounds pretty fun. I say, yeah, it is, except I think it also has some bad side effects. Like, the example I give her involves immovable objects. I spend all day looking through a camera. If I see something I don't like, I ask people to move it. It might be a chair or a vase, it might be a person. I might even ask them to move a wall, and they do. They move it right then, right there. She says, that sounds efficient and really satisfying. I said, yeah, but I think I'm also behaving like that when I get home. You can get away with behavior like this on a set. You can't get away with it in the real world. One person doesn't make all decisions. Things don't always go your way. People don't always do what you tell them to. Walls don't move on their own. Directors don't get this memo. I didn't. When things went kerflooey, I had coffee with my script supervisor. With a couple of rocky marriages behind her, I was sure she'd relate to my situation. I said, divorce fucking sucks. I was full of original insights like that during this period. She said, yup. Why I expected empathy and a pat on the back from this woman, I have no idea. My wife says I'm impossible to be around. She's right. Okay, maybe in my personal life, but at work, there too, Bruce, the crew is kind of getting to hate you. Hate me? I thought they loved me. They love you because they get paid for 10 hours and only work for 5, but they think you can be a real asshole. Jesus, do you think that? Yeah, I think you're an asshole, but I like you in spite of it. Oh, I'm glad you're in my corner. Has it been this way for a while, or is it like just recently with the divorce? Bruce, it's been years. You've gotten to be a fucking crazy asshole. Well, how come I keep working? That's a very good question. I think it's because you're so good at it. I realized I'd arrived at a schizo nadir, the moment when everything had simultaneously worked out perfectly and gone totally to shit.
Thank you for reading that. People can start, if they want to ask questions, they can go into the group chat at the bottom of your screen and click on that and write your questions there, and I'll start taking a look at that in a couple of minutes. Bruce, I think another thing that I find really interesting about the book, and it speaks a little bit to our current moment, is that when you came into the commercial world, you were kind of a disruptor. There was a certain status quo in terms of how companies worked and how directors worked. Most directors were on the roster of a company that they didn't run. There were very clear kind of guidelines about how much you bid for a job. And you came in and really, lowballed and underbidded on a lot of work. And that's really how you got your start. And it made me think when I was reading the book about what happened as digital technology became bigger and bigger and things started to migrate to the web, and this shift that's probably been happening now in your own career for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years as people have disrupted and underbid your bids. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Well, I think that door to entry in any industry has probably been there forever. And young people come in and they want a piece of it, and they know that if they can price it right and they can display some competence and some confidence, that someone will be willing to take a bet on them. And the people you're taking the work from are the people who've spent 15 years building up this career and building up credibility and building up their ability to price it in a way that I wish I could have priced it at 23. But there was no way people were going to pay me what they were paying a guy like George Gomes or a Norm Griner, who were very dominant in the late 70s, early 80s. So that was going to be how I got in. I don't think it's that different, Josh, from what young musicians do. I don't think it's that different from what young writers do. I don't think it's different than what young actors do. Actors work off Broadway to get a gig. I think that's, if you've got the desire to do it, you realize that you're going to have to give it away for a while. What's interesting about lately is that with the advent of digital and a little bit of the pandemic and things, all the price models have kind of lapsed again. But I say to the young people that I deal with, it sounds like I'm in a retirement home. What I say to the young people is you have nothing but opportunities at this point, because there are so many doors of entry, because there's so much chaos out there. There's so much opportunity. You just got to be able to do it, figure it out. Mm. So, we all want to get to a place where we're getting paid well and fairly for what we do, but it never starts that way.
This is a question from Peter Desmond. Bruce, do you have a favorite commercial that you've done? And if so, what made it your favorite? And can they see it, or where can they see it?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for being here. I think that one of my favorite campaigns that I did was in the early 2000s, and it was for TD Waterhouse. And I was doing a series of commercials, one built around Phil Jackson and one built around Gina Davis. And I think I enjoyed them because I was working with a great writer, and we had sort of a limitless budget to do what we wanted. And I'd hired Vilmos Zsigmond, the Academy Award-winning cinematographer, to photograph them. And we wandered around LA for 8 days, kind of telling jokes to each other. And the final product came out wonderfully. You know, we had it was a satisfying thing to do. A lot of the emotional stuff that I do is much smaller and has been seen by less people. You know, one of the things I highlight in the book is a commercial I made for a hospital chain in Michigan, where it's a mother and daughter waiting to see if the husband is going to make it through surgery. And it's a satisfying commercial that won a lot of awards. I mean, the emotional commercials tended to also be rewarded, I think, because it's hard to do.
Do you want to talk about kind of the remarkable thing that leads into that in that chapter?
Well, in a nutshell, I kept trying to figure out how to do this. I'd watch, I was watching movies more as a guideline for it. And I went to see a movie probably all of you have seen called My Life as a Dog, and Lasse Hallström's film. And what occurs is, as these young boys' mother becomes sicker and sicker, they wind up being sent away to stay with relatives far away, and they keep being put on a train. And the first time they get off the train in the small town, you know, it's okay, it's fine. It's a little sad, they're away from their mom. And the second time, still a little sad. The third time they go away, the audience knows that she's dying. She's going to die. She's never going to see them again. And when the boy gets off the train, instead of being in close like this, which is what I would do, Lasse Hallström put the camera what seemed like in Finland. You know, it was so far away that the train looked like a toy, and the kid getting off the train was like a dot. And I turn around in the audience, and it's not just me. 50 people are sobbing. I mean, sobbing as this is happening. They can't see anything. So I went and visited Lasse Hallström on a set. He was directing a movie that friends of mine were doing. And all I wanted to ask him was, I said, why did you do that? Why did you go and put this camera so far away? He said, you know, it's weird. I didn't mean to do it, but the DP kind of suggested it. And then when we cut it together, I cut it with a close-up. But then I found that when you use the wide shot, it was more emotional. And I said, why do you think? He said, because every viewer filled in the blank their own way. It wasn't like you were in close and you had to see the tear or you had to see the turn of the mouth. You knew who the character was, but when it's really far away, the audience, each person responds differently, but profoundly. And so I felt like I learned a lesson. I had to always remind myself, Josh, when I was doing those commercials, those types of commercials, to make sure I had a wide shot. Because often I'd forget it. I'd think, oh, it's so much more interesting to look at the actor's face.
This is a question for you from Megan. And she says, what advice do you have for recent film school grads who want to break into the business, especially in these times?
It's just as hard as it ever was. I think that, again, there are these opportunities out there. And I think if you have a film that you've shot, if you have a film that you've edited, if you have some kind of computer skills where you can work in production and you have good organizational abilities, there are all sorts of ways to walk into the door. I feel bad for people who go to film school, because I think it's, you know, you don't realize till you leave. For example, film school, no one ever mentioned commercials to me. They would all pontificate about, you know, the script for 8.5 for what would happen. It never dawned on me that these people who were teaching me were not working on film sets. So I was listening to people who had no idea how to make a living in film. But I would just say, get out there and do it. Identify every company, every type of company that's provides employment, whether it's editorial, a camera company, a commercial company, a doc company, anything.
This brings up actually kind of in some respects how I went from acting into writing films and ultimately producing, writing, and directing films, which I left acting and have been doing for the last 18 years. Because Bruce, about a couple years into my commercials career, I approached you out of the blue and said, here's this script, you should direct this, do you want to direct this? You know, what the fuck there? Why'd you do it? What happened? What's going on?
Oh, it was so much fun, because I never thought I'd make another movie, and it was 20 years later, and my life was really kind of upside down. And you were, when you and I first met, and I read it, I was perfectly entertained, and I thought it was a wonderful movie. But I just thought, it's another independent film. Josh is never going to raise the money to do this, so I don't have to worry about saying yes. And then all the money
4
came
years
together.
later.
4 years later, fast by independent film terms, we went off and made a movie. And it was a great experience. Instead of working with 60 people on a set every day, there were 15 of us. It was a blast. It was very hard work.
To give the audience listening tonight a quick, like, how incredible this was. This was 46 locations. We shot it in 17 days on a $125,000 production budget on film, not on digital.
Yeah.
With a very young crew and Bruce.
Yeah, it was, and we did a lot of stuff. We had a producer who I summed up, our line producer. He may be with us here tonight. He'll be flattered by this story, where I would always be in a location, and whomever owned the location would start yelling at me or stand really close, like, you got to get out of here. And I would walk over to Terry Leonard and say, Terry, give the guy an extra $50. I need another 15 minutes. He goes, I haven't given him any money yet. I'm not going to give him $50 now. So then I realized that the entire production was being pulled out of thin air. But it was a great experience, reminded me of how fortunate I was to be able to make both movies and commercials. And it also did a lot for me psychologically, to be able to take a break because of all the chaos that I was going through in my personal life at that point.
Do you want to, one thing I was going to say, because it's interesting because of what Weissman said to you, but I remember a friend of mine who was a big showrunner on television at the time, about 10 years older than me. When we were making Backseat, he called me and he said, how does it feel? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you'll never feel this way again. And I said, why? And he said, because you'll never have an opportunity again where someone's giving you the money to make a movie that you wrote with people that you care about in this way, where you just have to answer to the few people that you're with. And he was right. That's been true. So it was an interesting thing, that advice that you got. This is from John Kelly. Bruce, you have a remarkable talent for reaching out to very talented fellow directors, among other people, to seek professional advice. What specific suggestions do you have for younger professionals about both A, how to get in the right mindset for, and B, how tactically to approach someone out of the blue, particularly someone that you think will never return your call?
Great question. I always felt that it was worth it to pick up the phone and call somebody. I was shocked at the number of people who took my phone calls. I also was so dumb that I would tend to go to, particularly when I was looking for a job as a young person, I would just go to people's offices and, and say, can I drop off my resume? Is there someone I can talk to? Anybody want to look at my film? I think you just have to be, I think when you're the youngest and you haven't had the ability, I mean, I could go see Lasse Hallström because I've been working for a while and I had friends in the crew and, I was going along. But other than that, it's really a matter of trying to connect dots. I say to that, when I moved to New York, I felt like I was never not looking for a job. I was looking for a job when I was sleeping. So anybody, anywhere could present an opportunity. And I think you just follow through with that. I think you do it now with email, you do it with whatever. And I think you'd be surprised how many established professionals are really excited to talk to younger people and spare them a little of what they went through, or at least help them pick a direction.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And I would just add to that, being a producer myself, I've found, and I think I get a little bit of this from you as well, Bruce, that there's never been someone that I've wanted to reach that I haven't been able to reach. And
right. And
people are often surprised.
And did you find it to be super challenging? Like you had to do a cat and mouse game and ambush them? It's not so hard.
And usually if you come with authenticity and presence and you're genuine in your approach, I've found that people have often, most people meet me with that same spirit.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. I think it's much more a matter of, for young people to just develop the courage to do it. Well, what's going to happen? They're not going to call you back. So what?
Michelle Harris just wants to remind you to say, come on, aren't the Olive Garden spots your favorite? I mean,
yeah, they are.
They're all of our favorites. So.
And I think we also need to acknowledge that I've seen Michelle Harris, who is lying in a hospital bed watching this, because I think she's about to have an appendectomy. That is devotion, Michelle. That is devotion.
We should all meet her at an Olive Garden.
She might even be under a local at this point, so that if she pans her camera around, we can see how they're doing.
This is a question from Scott Wright, and he says, Bruce, I know you as a competitor who is also a gentleman. Who got under your skin and brought out your darker side? He's raising the temperature
here. Scott's one of my tennis partners, an excellent tennis player, and also an author. There were a number of people who got under my skin. The final draft of the book, I took those names out and just would refer to them as, douchebag A. Because I didn't think it was necessary. They're all still alive. They're all still working to some extent. And in some ways also, I realized the people who had really gotten under my skin and had just made my life awful for the experience that I was working with them, that was what they did to almost everybody. That was just their MO. There was one guy who, during an audition, I was doing these terrible commercials for the guy. And maybe 100 actors had read the copy, and it was terrible, but it wasn't the actors. But for some reason, I'm sitting next to him. He's this big, self-important, creative director. And he turns to the actors and he goes, "Can't you act?" And I said, "Excuse me, don't speak to actors like that." He said, "What?" I said, "The reason that 100 people have not done well in these auditions is because these commercials suck. It is not because of the actors." So he gives me this, you can imagine. So, and then I have to spend 7 days with this shithead, and he ruins my life. He ruins my life such that most of the people watching will understand it. I set up the first shot, and it's a woman looking out a window. And I go over and I say, "We're going to do this," and then she'll leave, exit left. He goes, "Can't do that shot." I said, "What, do you want to have her go the other way? What's the issue?" He goes, "That window has 6 panes in it. And in the storyboard, the window has 4 panes." I said, "It's a storyboard, man. It's a cartoon. It was drawn like 5 months ago. It doesn't matter." He goes, "That's the storyboard. Shoot the storyboard. That's your job." This is what I got for telling him that his commercials sucked. I was going to be his bitch for like 5 days. So I hate that man, Scott. I hate him. He's still alive. And I'm not telling you. I will tell you tomorrow who that man is.
While you're playing tennis. I think that actually speaks to what someone else was saying, which is a little bit about advice. One of the things that I think is really clear in the book is you really seem to become an expert at understanding how to navigate the psychology of the industry and the people in the industry. So can you talk a little about like what you would do with Video Village at the beginning of the day, because of what you knew would happen after an hour of shooting or after 2 hours of shooting?
I mean, if you do it as long as I was fortunate enough to do it, you learn. Otherwise, you're out of business. And I had to learn how to be able to control the frustration that would come from what the process is. You know, an early job I had, I thought we were done shooting. It was a laxative commercial, and the copywriter walked over to me and said, "I don't think the woman understands." I said, "Understands what?" He said, "I don't think she understands peristalsis," which is the technical term for moving your bowels. I said, I definitely think she gets that. I do. And he said, "No, somebody's got to talk to her." And I said, "I'm not going to do that. You can go talk to her about it." I would blow my stack a lot. The fact that I was able to feed myself the first 10 years because I was not well behaved is, in hindsight, kind of remarkable. But what you'd learn was that they were just as uncomfortable being on a set as you'd expect. So you'd create, my wonderful producers and production managers create video villages where they'd be able to sit and be comfortable and have magazines, and everybody's getting them coffee, and they watch the monitor. And the greatest thing that's ever happened is cell phones, because now the attention span of people on a set is about 3 minutes. You go over, you say, "Oh, this is what I'm going to do," this, and then after like 7 minutes of shooting, they're over there in Video Village going, you know, give me the thumbs up. But they're just, you know, they've got Zappos open and they're ordering shoes, and it's, you know, nobody's paying any attention.
It reminds me of that great story. I'm trying to remember the screenwriter. Maybe you'll know who this was, or someone on this in the audience will. But there's a great story of a screenwriter in Hollywood, and he was writing a script, and he turned it into the studio, and some huge mega studio head, you know, didn't like it, had notes. They gave him these horrible notes, and his assistant has to deliver to them. And he says to the assistant, "Okay, here's all you need to do. Go and get blue copy paper. That is the one that shows you've done the rewrites, and just reprint exactly the script that I've done at all the places they said I need to rewrite with the blue, as if I've rewritten it, and we'll send that back in." And he did, and everyone loved it at that point.
I don't, you know, I would want to qualify for my agency friends, and I have many agency friends, is that they are in Video Village in the most precarious place because they're having to sit with their clients, and the clients have the least understanding of what's happening on the set. So I think that the agency people are just as happy for cell phones as I am, because they want that client distracted so that we can just go about making the commercial.
Yep. This is a question for Bruce from Jeffrey. As we know, commercial directing is a craft, and there's a fairly steep learning curve. Having directed for decades, what do you now know is the secret to great work that you had no idea was the secret when you first started?
It's a really good question. I think that the thing that I feel is still essential to doing good work is to be able to go fast, because I think that one of the reasons that so much content is terrible to look at, whether it's commercials, television, or movies, is that the people in charge, and I would say buck stops with the director, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They can't make a decision. Actors go to sleep, actors get frustrated, crews go crazy, and you feel like you're operating without a leader. But if you can move efficiently and be decisive, and that means you've done your homework before you go, and you know you've identified what you can control and what you can't control. I mean, I've watched, you know, I've gone on sets and watched directors suddenly turn the opposite direction and say, "We're going to shoot over there," and everybody goes, wait a second, we prepped it for this. Yeah, but complete buzzkill for everyone. And you know, just the day will die, and what happens in front of the camera will die. I think that's the main thing to me that I learned. The only thing that matters is what's happening in front of the camera, and you've got to create an environment where the best stuff happens in front of the camera.
Hi, I'm coming back to you to say maybe that is an excellent place to end. And this has been a really wonderful evening. And thank you so much to Josh and to Bruce and to this wonderful audience.
Thanks for having us, Maris.